The strongest sentence Paul ever wrote came out of the weakest moment of his life, not despite it, because of it. It wasn't written from a pulpit in front of an admiring crowd. It was written after a private, humiliating no from God, the kind of no most of us would never admit to publicly, let alone put in a letter that would be read out loud in church. He begged God 3 times to remove something. 3 times God said no. And the word Paul uses instead of relief, most translations soften it completely. Paul didn't soften it at all. Paul never tells us exactly what the thorn was. Some think it was his eyes, failing slowly, forcing him to dictate every letter to a scribe. Others think it was something worse, a shame that followed him into every city he preached in, something that undercut him the moment he opened his mouth. Whatever it was, Paul has a name for it, a messenger of Satan, he calls it, sent to torment him, to keep him from becoming proud. Not a small inconvenience, a recurring physical humiliating weight he carried into every room. And there's context most people miss. Paul is writing to Corinth, a city obsessed with impressive speakers. Corinth loved polish, confidence, rhetoric that filled a room. And by his own admission, Paul wasn't that. His enemies in that church, the ones he sarcastically calls the super apostles, mocked him for exactly this. They said his letters were weighty, but in person he was unimpressive. His speech, they said, amounted to nothing. It wasn't a one-time insult either. Just 1 chapter earlier, Paul lists what his life actually looked like: beaten with rods 3 times, shipwrecked 3 times, a night and a day adrift at sea, danger from rivers, danger from robbers, sleepless nights, hunger, cold. He calls it his catalog of weaknesses, almost daring the reader to be unimpressed. This is the man God answers with 1 sentence, instead of a single explanation. So Paul does what anyone carrying that kind of weight would do. He asks God to take it away, once, then again, then a 3rd time. Not polite requests, the kind of praying where you stop choosing your words, where you just repeat the same plea, exhausted, because you don't know what else to say to God. 3 times he begged for relief. 3 times, the thorn stayed exactly where it was. No removal, no explanation for why. Just 1 sentence, handed back to him instead of the healing he asked for. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Read that quickly and it sounds like a consolation prize. Like God is saying, I know this isn't what you wanted, but here's something instead. A trade. A downgrade dressed up as comfort. But look at the actual Greek Paul used, and the sentence stops sounding like a consolation. It starts sounding like a claim about how power actually works. If you want to know what the original language is really saying, not just what the English lets you assume, this channel is for you. Subscribe, and let's get into the word. The word translated weakness is astheneia. Break it apart and you find its root, stenos, which means strength. In front of it sits the Greek negative prefix a. Astheneia doesn't just mean a hard season or a rough week. It means without strength, nothing left to draw on. It's the same word used elsewhere in the New Testament for physical sickness, for the kind of exhaustion that isn't dramatic, it's just constant, grinding, the ordinary kind of depleted. That's the word Paul chooses to describe himself, in front of the very church that mocked him for it. Not struggle, not challenge, without strength. Now hold that next to the second word, dynamis, power. It's the root behind our English word dynamite, our word dynamic. Raw, explosive capability. In the New Testament, dynamis is the exact word used for the power that raised Jesus from the dead, not a metaphor for strength. The actual power over death itself, at work in a human body. So the sentence is really saying this: my without strength, my astheneia, is exactly where my raised Jesus from the dead power, my dynamis, shows up. Not next to it, not after it ends, inside it. Even the word sufficient carries more weight in Greek than it does in English. It's arkei, from a root meaning to be enough, to hold back nothing more that's needed. Not sufficient like a bare minimum, scraping by. Sufficient like a well that doesn't run dry no matter how many times you come back to draw from it. Paul isn't told his grace will probably cover this 1 time. He's told it does not run out. But here's the phrase almost every translation blurs: made perfect. The Greek verb is teleitai, from teleo. It doesn't mean improved. It doesn't mean polished up a little. It means to reach an end, to arrive at a goal, to be completed. It's the same root behind the last word Jesus spoke from the cross, teleitai. It is finished. Not it is fixed, finished, completed, arrived exactly where it was always meant to go. There's a third word worth slowing down for. In the second half of the verse, Paul says he'll boast in his weakness so that the power of Christ may rest on him. Rest is a translation of episkenoo, and inside that word is skene, the word for a tent, the same word used for the tabernacle, the tent where God's presence lived among Israel in the wilderness. Episkenoo means to pitch a tent over something, not to visit briefly, to take up dwelling, the way God's presence once dwelled over the tabernacle. So the full picture is this. Paul's weakness doesn't just make room for power to visit, it becomes the site where power sets up a tent and stays. His astheneia is not a gap that power steps around, it's the ground power pitches camp on. Line up all four words in one verse turns into a small theology of its own. Arkei, a grace that never runs dry. Astheneia, a strength that's fully spent. Dynamis, resurrection power, not a metaphor. And episkenoo, that power setting up a tent and staying, the way God's presence once camped over the tabernacle in the wilderness. 4 words, 1 sentence, and English usually only lets you see one of them clearly. Read the verse again, slowly, with the real words standing where the soft ones used to be. My power reaches its intended completion, not around your weakness, not after your weakness ends, but inside it. And that power doesn't just brush past you, it pitches a tent and dwells there. That's not a consolation prize, that's a design. You are probably not carrying a mysterious thorn from a first-century apostle, but you know exactly what astheneia feels like. It's the diagnosis that didn't go away, the relationship that keeps needing more than you have left to give, the prayer you've now prayed 3 times, or 30 times, about the same thing, and nothing has changed, and underneath all of it, a quiet, exhausting belief. If I were stronger, God could actually use me. Once I fix this, once I have more stability, more energy, more togetherness, then I'll finally be useful for something. Maybe it's a body that keeps failing you before your mind is ready to stop. Maybe it's a pattern of failure you thought you would have outgrown by now, still showing up at the worst possible moments. Maybe it's simply not being the strong one in the room, the composed one, the one who has it together, while everyone around you seems to. Astheneia doesn't need a dramatic backstory to count. It just means you've run out of your own strength, and you're still standing there anyway. Paul's sentence takes that belief and turns it over completely. He isn't told to wait until the thorn disappears. He's told that his dynamis, his access to resurrection power, reaches full completion precisely at the place his own strength runs out. Not later, not once he's recovered, not once he looks impressive to the people watching. There, right there, in the weakness itself, while it's still weak. That changes what weakness even is. It isn't the obstacle standing between you and being used by God. In this verse, it's the location. It's the exact place where the tent gets pitched. That's a hard thing to actually believe about your own life, not just about Paul's. It's easier to nod along with the theology and still privately wait for the strength to arrive before you consider yourself usable. But the verse doesn't leave room for that waiting. It says the power reaches completion in the weakness, present tense, not someday, not once it's resolved. Paul's response to all of this isn't gritted teeth endurance, a man white-knuckling his way through. He keeps going, in the very next line. He says he will boast, gladly, in his weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest on him. He doesn't fight to hide the astheneia from the church that mocked him for it anymore. He stops hiding it, because hiding it meant hiding the one place his dynamis had promised to show up and stay. Go back to that candle from the very beginning, nearly drowned in its own melted wax. Barely holding a flame in a room with no other light, it never needed to become a bonfire. It only ever needed to keep burning exactly where it was, and let something bigger pitch a tent around it. That's the whole shift this verse is asking for. Not to become the kind of person who no longer runs out of strength. Paul never becomes that person. He stays weak, by his own account, for the rest of his life. The shift is smaller and harder. It's letting the running out be the place you stop hiding, instead of the place you keep apologizing for. If one word from this video is the word you needed today, put it in the comments below. astheneia, dynamis, or sufficient. I read every single one.